So at time, I'd like to welcome Tamara Cottery from Literacy Link South Central, who is our moderator for today's webinar. Go ahead, Tamara.
Thanks, Sarah. Good afternoon, everybody. My name, as Sarah said, is Tamara Cottery, and I'm from Literacy Link South Central. I'm a member of the Online Community of Practice Working Committee, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar, Why Math Matters. I'm very pleased to see that today's topic has caught the attention of so many people from all across Ontario. To begin, I'd like to say a few words about the LBS Online Community of Practice. It's a series of webinars that has been developed collaboratively by members of Ontario's LBS regional networks, sectors, and the provincial support organizations for literacy. Our goal is to provide affordable, because they're free, professional development to LBS practitioners on topics that are important to them. We've been providing these webinars since 2015-2016, and we've done 5 a year. You can find all the previous webinar presentations, recording links, and transcripts at the link that you see on the screen. We're always interested in hearing about topics that are timely and relevant to you, so if you have webinar topic ideas, please send them to us. In today's webinar, we'll be learning more about why math matters. I think we all have a general appreciation that math does matter on some level, but to develop a more fulsome understanding of why math matters, we're going to drill a bit deeper into 4 key areas. Math and EQAO. For those of you who may not be familiar with what EQAO is, it's a standardized testing that happens in the kindergarten to grade 12 school system. We'll also look more at why math matters for literacy and basic skills programs. We'll move on then to a review of math in our post-secondary system and finish off with consideration of math in today's workplaces. After the 4 mini presentations, I will facilitate a panel discussion, and then we'll have some time for a question and answer period. Just a quick note, if a question occurs to you during a presentation and you're worried you might forget it if you leave it to the end, put your question up on text chat and we'll circle back to it during our Q&A session. I mentioned we have 4 main topics, and we are also fortunate to have 4 excellent presenters who are with us today to share their knowledge and experience. I'd like to take a moment to introduce them. We have Jane Tour, Executive Director of Project READ, to talk to us about EQAO and math. We have Doug Noyes, or I hope we have Doug if he's been able to get on, Executive Director of Literacy Link Eastern Ontario, also known as LEO, to talk about math and literacy and basic skills programming. Barb Glass is the Executive Director of the College Sector Committee for Adult Upgrading, and she will help us understand why math matters in post-secondary education. And last but certainly not least, we'll hear Deborah Mountain discuss math and today's workplaces. Deborah is the Executive Director of the Elgin Middlesex Oxford Workforce Planning and Development Board. Before we dive in, we thought we'd take a moment for a quick poll. This first webinar, Why Math Matters, is open to adult learners as well as practitioners. We're interested to see who has joined us today. So with Sarah's help, I think we're going to launch a poll. And we'd like to know if you are an adult learner, an adult literacy instructor or teacher, or a staff person for a support organization. So you can see on your screen that you should have 3 choices there. Oh, and you guys are already quick on the draw, filling in your responses. Just a few more people to weigh in here. Okay, so it doesn't look as though we have any learners on, and that's okay. This is the first time we've actually ever tried having a webinar that would be something that learners might join into. And the good news is that the session is being recorded. So if you think that this is something that you might want to show to some of the adult learners in your program or have them listen to, then there will always be that opportunity. So it seems as though 86% are literacy practitioners and the rest are from literacy support organizations. Okay, that's great. So we'll move back to our regular presentation here. Let's see if I can do that. Okay. So thanks everybody for participating in the poll, and we're going to get started with our presentations now. I'm going to pass the microphone to our first presenter, Jane Tuer. Jane?
Thanks, Tamara. Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. I always think of this as so close to Friday, it feels like Friday. So I was listening to the news this morning, and the people on the news show kept saying, I woke up this morning and thought it was Friday, and one person thought it was Saturday. So maybe it's just because it's September. I don't know about you folks, but I'm tired now. September is almost over, and I'm feeling exhausted, even after summer. So with that said, I'm going to be all exciting and dealing with telling you folks all about EQAO, which actually stands for Education Quality and Accountability Office, and seems to be the nemesis of the regular system of schools because, let's face it, majority of them are not doing very well. I am not going to talk to you about any of the formulas that are on this first page in case any of you got that moment of panic and thought, oh, good Lord, she's going to start doing that. No. What I'm going to talk to you about are statistics and what it means to our programs, right? I love this picture. Sorry, we just can't trust you. We know that statistics can be misleading, and test results are only good for people who are comfortable taking tests. It's only the kind of literacy stance we have. But we do feel the need to question statistics or blame statistical numbers as being wrong, and then we like to spout off some weird statistic to prove our point. I don't know about you, but if you've ever been reading along with something in the comment sections of different articles, you'll find that people say things like, 80% of the people are literate, and when you work in literacy, you're going, that's not right. So you know that stats are only as good as we know where they came from. People, however, are very fascinated by the power of statistics, right? Since math has already been done for them. That's the big deal. When math has been done for you, you kind of go, oh, great, I'll throw out these statistics and use them. So we throw out the PIAAC numbers like we really understand where they came from. Some magazines, like Time, have a section in each magazine that has some really interesting statistics, like $80 trillion is the amount of money spent by the U.S. in the Iraqi war, followed by the totally absurd and barely related ones like 4,317 yards is the distance covered if you were to take all the ammunition shells fired by U.S. soldiers in Iraq since the war started. I do believe it was President Reagan that started to do that, if you laid all the bricks idea. So some statistics are good and others are misleading because we also know that every radio station is number one. It could be number one for the amount of commercial time, but it's going to be number one. We can all use that. So why do we use stats? Well, they're powerful. Once someone has done the statistic for you, that's a harder word to say. I'm just going to keep saying stats. It's a useful piece of arsenal to have, right? EQO stats are really important to adult literacy programs because they can help us to predict what's happening in the future. When you can show that children from the age of 8 to the age of 11 are losing math skills, you can predict that your programs will have learners needing LBS for at least 10 years, right? 8-year-olds, 10 years, we've got the 18-year-olds that are starting to head into our programs. When you can show that applied math students in grade 9 are mostly not reaching what has been set as the provincial standard, you can predict issues for apprenticeship and once again a need for math programming within our programs. EQAO numbers help you to plan. They give you the opportunity to see what's happening with youth and where the needs will be in the future for adult literacy programming. The results are scary. I'm not kidding you. If you haven't looked at them, if you have, you will know what I'm talking about. But they really do help to have that impact on why LBS programs are necessary. You can really sell to politicians, to funders, why we're needed and why we will be needed down the road by just showing these statistics. They're not there from my standpoint to blame teachers. We're not here to blame the teachers. It's not that. They're here to show why we don't have parents who can do math and can support their children learning. This cycle is going to continue forever until we do something in that capacity. And at some point in time, I'll probably go into my little rant about the family literacy programs like right now. We run a family literacy program. And we constantly have to deal with everybody talking about early literacy, all the funding that will go into early literacy. And it is quite frustrating because I start to go, well, yes, because we all know the stork drops all the babies down into the middle of the city, and there's just like this little baby gang that happens because no parents are ever involved. And that's where I start to go with, there are parents attached to these children, and we know the parents are the first and most important teacher of children. And children learn how to learn by the age of 2. So if we don't get them early, we're not going to help them. We can put all these programs into place, but apparently also by the time you reach 8, none of these programs are necessary anymore. It was kind of like for years with autism, all the funding stopped at the age of 5 because apparently you were fixed. So this is another issue for us, and we can keep showing this. It's another problem about the fact that too many times people keep saying, and I'm sure there's practitioners that say this as well, sorry, but parents and practitioners are guilty of saying, oh, I hate math. I really don't like doing math. Well, if we are supposed to be the person that's showing other people, and especially children, why math is important, if you tell them you hate it and you dislike it and it's not fun and you're not good at it, they're already on that, oh my gosh, it's a scary thing. We really need to start changing people's opinions. Stop saying it's a scary thing. We use it every day and we don't even realize we're using it. And that's one of the biggest things I think we can pass along to our students is don't tell your children math is scary and you didn't like it. Because we also try to tell them not to tell their kids that, they hate reading. Because once again, we know that's not a good result. So this is the one thing that I've heard about EQAO though. The results aren't real. I've heard this from educators, from different people. I've actually heard people from school boards say this. I've tried the literacy questions. If they're a lawyer and can't pass the test, I'm not sure I'd want them as a lawyer, because that's what they say. They say these lawyers weren't even able to pass the grade 10 literacy test. It's not that hard. And sure, I get it. Some of the math, it might be a little bit more difficult if you can't remember all the equations for different things. But kids in school should have a good idea of what, area means and how to get that. These aren't things that are going to be outside of what they're doing. Yeah, I have my grade 12 math, I have grade 13 calculus and all that. If somebody put a calculus test in front of me, I'm fairly sure I would not score more than maybe 5%. And that's only if I had my TI 30. And so those of you that took it in my years, you'll know what a TI 30 is. So here's an example of the actual test that's given in grade 3. Right? Just 2 questions that I'm giving you an example of. The first one would be considered to be a beginning level 1 or OALCF essential skills beginning level 1, right? You're adding 2 numbers together. They're 3-digit, but it's only one type of computation. The second one could be considered to be a high level 1, low level 2, because literally we're showing them the coins, and they have to be able to add those together and subtract, right? So it does have 2 computations, but they're fairly simple. What I like about this questions particularly, though, is you can show that it's starting to be that applied math already when they're 8 years old. Kids are getting applied math. They're looking at actual coins and doing it from there. So most children in middle class schools, because I'm going to talk about the difference between the middle class and poverty in this, can complete this EQAO test and reach the provincial standard. The majority are doing that. Now, let's look at the grade 6 questions. Here's a couple here. Now, they use a graph. This is really not the hardest thing to look at here, if you have any graph knowledge at all, because you're seeing it's about the highest temperature is 27 degrees and the lowest is 18. Subtract those 2 and you've ended up with 9, correct? So the next one is about the bean plant growing 0.7 centimeters each day. So they have to be able to understand how to multiply numbers together with decimals. But once again, there's no question that these numbers are going to be close, right? It works for 28 days, 30 days, or 31, that it will be 21 centimeters, right? But even if they didn't know how to do the decimals quite, it would still come up with 210. So once again, these are not extremely tough questions. These are questions they should be able to handle, and I've looked through them, and yes, they do have to do some things with area, but once again, they will know those formulas. The problem here is that within the education system, and this is the system I think is broken, is the fact that teachers who may have their bachelor's in history and could be fabulous teachers within elementary school are being forced to also teach math. And if that's not their forte, and if they're one of those people that would rather sit there and say, I'm scared of math, I hate math, this can be an issue. I think the thing is, I was able to do all of the math questions in the grade 9 math test as well. That's online and available. And I haven't been in a grade 9 math class. I haven't been in a math class for basically almost 40 years. So it's not, once again, a super tough test. But here's what happens with the results. Right? If we can see this. You've got the grade 3 to 6 math results for 2016-17. The 2017 and 18 came out, but let's just talk about that. So these are the provincial numbers. Now, in 2017 and 18, they actually show that 61% in grade 3 and 49% in grade 6 reached the provincial standard. Right? If we wanted to estimate the children that were in grade 3 in 2013-14 at 67% reaching the provincial standard were the same kids that would be in grade 6 in 2017-18 and now test at 49%. That's a provincial drop of 18%. That's a powerful statistic. Kids are not doing well in math, and it's growing and growing. Not that the starting point was that great in the first place, but reading and writing are at much higher levels if you see the EQAO. Let's go over to just show what they came up with within their full report on this from kids from grade 3 in 2014 to grade 6. So they're talking about the same children. They're assuming mostly the same children. 46% maintained. That's what they did. 46% maintained. 4 actually rose. So half the kids either maintained or went to the provincial standard. But here's the biggest problem. 21% dropped from the standard. They used to reach the provincial standard in grade 3, and now they're not. And then 29% have never met the standard. And this is scary. Let's look at the grade 9 math results. I don't know if any of you have looked at this, but applied and academic. The discrepancy between academic math to applied, it's only 45% of grade 9 math students met the provincial standard that were in the applied. 45%. 55% didn't. The applied math kids should be the kids that just don't, it shouldn't be those kids that just don't do well at math, and that's what they're doing. I'm looking this. Oh, I'm reading something and it shouldn't be my question. Or is that the question to me, Tamara?
Sorry, Jane. I think you'd be looking at the text chat while you're presenting. I just want a clarification from the person who asked.
Oh, okay. Thanks. Anyway, sorry. The applied math kids shouldn't be the kids that just don't do well math. That's where they are. Unfortunately, that's the way the system works, because we know that applied math are the folks that are going to be doing the apprentice work, are going to be doing the work that is actually our infrastructure of how our world is going to be built, and be able to do this applied math. We need people that understand it, and I don't think that that's what's happening. They need to be able to apply what they're learning into the real life situations. We excel at teaching these skills within LBS, but unfortunately we can see how math becomes the hated subject at school. So I took 2 schools within middle class and poverty in both London and Kitchener. I thought that let's try 2 cities to see what the difference was. So this is our grade 9 math school. So we have Montcalm and from London, and you can see where they're sitting at below 40% for the applied math. And then Forest Heights, same way. In Kitchener, they're about the same amount. In the middle class schools, look how much better they do in the applied math. London Central, they're in a little bit higher level than that, but they're still only just below the half. Resurrection, which is in a middle class neighborhood, their applied students are doing much better than the rest. Now, it's interesting to also note here that Montcalm, being in from a lower income level school, high school, they have 100 applied math students and 72 academic math students. Well, if you flip over to London Central, they only have 17 applied math students and 213 academic math students. You're always going to see this within those schools, is that the schools that come from the higher education levels are going to have a bigger divide between, right? So let's look at the grade 3 math results between impoverished schools and middle class. You can see what I mean. We're talking about these, Wilton Grove compared to Jack Chambers in London, right? Wilton Grove, and I know this school well because my aunt actually taught there, so I know that they struggle. It is a highly impoverished area. Wilton Grove, 25% of the kids are reaching the provincial standard in grade 3. 25%. This shows, once again, why we can point out that people that are living in poverty probably do not have parents that have those skills to help them or develop those skills. So this is what they've been able to develop in school. But they're up against, in the real world, against kids that are sitting at Jack Chambers, who are at 83% of them are reaching this. That's a huge divide. How do you ever reach those skills? We know these kids are going to be in our programs for math because they're never going to reach that divide. Rockway, it's a little bit better than Wilton Grove from Kitchener, but Lackner Woods, I mean, maybe the divide's a little less, but it's, 41% versus 71%. Like, it's still a 30% divide. That's huge. These are the problems that we're really thinking about. This is grade 3. How are they ever going to catch up? It's just not going to happen, especially when we know that they drop in skills in grade 6. Because if we look here, now we're at these schools. Wilton Grove has now dropped to 15% are reaching the provincial standard in grade 6, and they were only at 25 before, right? Look at these guys. They're actually the few middle class, they start to go up. They're one of the few, if they're in the upper middle class schools, where they can start to see some grade 6 levels where they're going, but the impoverished schools keep dropping further. And this is going to be making a really big difference for all of us when we're talking about this. It's most of the kids in the impoverished areas are coming from immigrant families and from folks that live on OW and ODSP. And this is a big problem for us as we know that they're coming into our programs. If we didn't have EQAO, we'd never be able to prove where our programs are valuable or necessary to funders. We wouldn't have any idea of what was coming down the pike, right? We would be going, when are they coming? What is happening? What are we going to see next? This helps us to develop trends for our literacy service planning, and it really works that well. How many of our learners also have a high school diploma? This measurement of high school graduates is a proof that educational system is working is a bad statistic, and yet it's used all the time because it doesn't account for what kind of high school diploma either. Was it a modified diploma? Where did it come from? As we know in our programs, we have to justify for this, and that's a big problem for us because we're sitting there going, if they're in and they have a high school diploma, they don't seem to have the skills. And that is scary because we don't meet our needs within our programs for, our bean counting. So how many kids don't pass the literacy test, but somehow after 2 tries can take a literacy class and pass it? These are questions that keep popping into mind. Hopefully you can see how EQAO is important to adult literacy programs and how they affect you and how you can use them to start to predict or understand within your own programs and help adults that are also parents to understand why it's important to not say the words, I hate math, to their children. So with that said, I'm going to pass the presentation back over to Mara.
Thank you very much, Jane. That was incredible. A very short period of time to talk about really important factors like where's the next wave of adult literacy students coming from and why when it comes to math, and as well highlighting the connection between poverty and literacy. So just to put in a little plug here for Jane, which she did not ask me to do, but I think it's really, really important that the connection between literacy and numeracy and poverty be examined. And Jane has done some excellent work in using statistics to paint these pictures, as I think you got a glimpse of there. So thank you very much, Jane. At this point, I would normally pass the presentation over to Doug to talk to us about math and how it matters in LBS. Doug, are you able to get on? I think you've been quite valiantly trying.
Doug says he's on. Doug, if you can hear me now, could you click the green check mark icon in the upper left-hand corner? Great. Now, Doug, could you click the microphone icon to the left of your name, and we'll see if we can hear you.
Any luck with that?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
All right. Good stuff. Thanks for your patience, folks. I also would like to send out a thank you to Summer for making my slides all look much better than I would have had them. So thanks a lot, Summer. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk today about numeracy as a theme, and it became a real theme for us in the East. So Renfrew, Ottawa Valley Literacy Network, as well as LOCKSS and Leo, we decided that we were going to really focus on numeracy at our conference. And our conference is called Connecting Excellence in LBS, or ConX for short. And we decided that we wanted to have this as a theme, and as a result, we were able to pull a lot of people together to focus really on numeracy, especially as how we deal with it in LBS. One of the neat things about this was we, as three networks, didn't want to presume that we knew what the field needed, and so we had people from across the East, from LBS, set up a planning committee for us, and those practitioners then helped develop the agenda as well as the topics. Then had our part-time staff, Maureen Keeler, who works for Leo. She's our projects and events coordinator, and she pulled the whole thing together for us. That was a monumental task, but she did it. We then reached out to workshop facilitators, not only from within the East region, but outside, and I'll be able to show you some of those folks that helped us with that. We were very fortunate. We had about 125 participants for the 2 days, including many MTCU staff, as well as the Eastern Region Director. We were very pleased that we had 125 participants because at that point in time, the colleges were on strike, so the number would have really swollen had we had the colleges participating as well. We were also able to get MTCU to fund much of the event, even though participants happily paid the registration and accommodation fees. So it was an interesting way of taking a look at how we could pull a conference together. So one of the things that we're realizing is that, please understand that I sometimes use math or mathematics, and sometimes I use numeracy. It's sort of my essential skills background. But numeracy became a focus because we saw it as the weakest competency in the OALCF. We wanted to, we were taking a look at some of the work that was done. For instance, Jane Tour, who just spoke with us, Jane sort of, I first heard a workshop of hers in Peterborough a few years back, and she talked about EQAO results, and that just got me thinking, oh wow, we need to do something about numeracy. So thanks, Jane. We also find out that numeracy as a weakness is continuously highlighted through assessment, employer feedback, employment services, as well as apprentices and their trainers. One of the things we wanted to do at this conference, ConX, we wanted to take a look at numeracy, but take a look at how we could demystify it. We wanted to bring it back to the basics. We wanted to use real-life grocery flyers, provide workplace documents for us to be looking at, pay stubs, those sorts of things, and bring it back to something that was tangible and something that the learners see on a regular basis, and show them how math is actually part of the everyday life. We also wanted to show how numeracy interacts with software. So for instance, we're taking a look at Excel as a software. The people are going to go in and set up formulas, those sorts of things. So numeracy maths gets into that. Even taking a look at Word documents and adjusting your margins using the rulers on the top. We also had a look at numeracy problem solving. It's sort of a higher order problem solving using numerical thinking and specifically estimation. Estimation is a really key part to numeracy. I don't think that I'm telling you folks anything you don't already know. I just want to explain to you how we came to decide that we wanted numeracy as a theme in our workshop. So on this page, this was sort of a little snapshot of what we were looking at. We had 4 workshops running continuously at all times, except for some of the full ones, like the introductory remarks. So what we know is that lack of numeracy skills is not a new issue. I think it's just being highlighted more now by the EQAO results. Some of the workshops that we ran, Leslie Hamilton and I, we like to do this, so we ran a workshop on how people can write numeracy tasks, but not only how to write the numeracy tasks, but also to provide the steps of getting the answer. We learned how to do these sorts of things several years ago, and especially in some projects that we've been doing with our friends up in Thunder Bay. We also had a person come in from the Upper Canada District School Board. Her name is Shelley Corleon, and Shelley provided us with some real-life strategies and examples that are being used with the K-12 children. So it was really good for us to see that they are taking numeracy seriously, etc., as they should be. But there were some really interesting things that we could adapt and adopt for our learners in LBS. We also had Summer. Summer Burton came in and shared Get in the Game, how to use gaming motivation in the classroom. That was a lot of fun. A lot of people really liked that. Jane Tour, yes, Jane came in and talked about EQAO for us. Thank you. We also had Lisa Marenzel come and talk with the group about geocaching, a GPS technology to reinforce numeracy skill development in a fun way. And that was also quite a hit. And we had Monica Janowska-Pasina from Alpha Plus come, and she led a discussion around how digital technology supports basic number sense instruction and learning. Okay, so as I mentioned before, numeracy as a competency is one of the largest competencies in the OALCF. So we have, so it's one of the large ones. We know that. We also know that it intertwines with other competencies, certainly with digital. We can also see how it intertwines with working with others, that kind of stuff. Math skills enable learners to complete numeracy tasks. So again, we're going back to helping learners develop the skills so that they can perform numeracy tasks. And I think that's exactly what we're doing in LBS. And we can't lose sight of that, because this is really, really important stuff that we're doing. And I really believe that that is what employers are looking for, and people in the trades are looking for, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things also about numeracy is it crosses languages, cultures, and generations. So it's a universal language. And we want to work with employers as well as employment service job developers to find out what are the key numeracy tasks required on jobs, and then we can provide some LBS programming to help people gain the skills so that they could do those tasks on the jobs. Okay. So in programming, well, again, one of the things we need to really focus on is reducing the fear about mathematics and make it real. And I think that's how we can actually help to reduce the fear, is to make sure that the learners can see that they're actually already doing math, whether it be in budgeting, withdrawing money from an ATM, measuring amounts for a recipe, etc. We also want to align the numeracy instruction directly with the goal path. We also want to have a look at how the numeracy instruction is determined through the assessment results and build on those current numeracy skills to develop additional skills. Same things we're doing in reading, writing, etc., etc., and it's the same things we've always been doing in numeracy as well. It's just nice to refresh that. We also want to teach strategies. So again, that's going to help demystify, reduce the fear around numeracy. So we're going to teach some strategies. So one of the things, for instance, I just throw this out as an example, that when you multiply by the number 9, the digits of the answer always add up to 9. So it's a quick check for the learner then to make sure if they're multiplying by 9, if they add the numbers in the sum or in the total, it should also add up to 9. If not, then they'll have to go back and do it again. We also want to teach how to solve written problems, and that's a real strategy, taking a look at what is within the written problem, what has nothing to do with the problem, and what do you really need to focus on in order to complete that task. Okay. All right, so this is my final slide. Oops. Second final slide, sorry about that. I'll get through this quickly. Okay, again, so we know this, unlike some competencies, with math answers, they're right or they're wrong, as opposed to maybe something a little more subjective like writing. It's really, again, I go back to, it's important to show the learners different ways of getting the same answer when you're doing math, because depending on the learner's learning style or whatever, they're going to pick the way that makes most sense for them, but either way they're still going to get the right answer. So show them different methods of getting the answer. Okay. Okay. So numeracy will continue to be, and it has always been, a major part of literacy. I believe that current numeracy tasks will remain the same. However, numeracy may change in terms of how it will affect or how it will interact with the future. We'll probably be talking about this a little bit later in our discussion piece. Numeracy is the foundation of STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and math, but without the math skills, the people will not be able to do the science, technology, or engineering. I'm lucky to be a part of the Eastern Regional Partnership for Adult Education through the Ministry of Education. This project is going on in the East. It's funded by MTCU, ironically. And it's a group that's looking at ways to share resources, strategies, and knowledge in adult education from the Ministry of Education with LBS. And I think that that's an interesting project that we should continue to focus on, look at, and find out if there aren't ways that we could be sharing more resources, etc. And that, Tamara, is it.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Doug. I love how you ended off your portion of the presentation with talking about a partnership with the Ministry of Education. So throughout your presentation, even though it was on a conference that you held in the East, specifically on numeracy, but you talked about EQAO, you talked about bringing in people from the K-12 system. We're not the only people who are going to be involved in addressing this numeracy issue. So I love the theme of partnership that came through there. I just want to remind everybody who is listening right now that if you have questions, you can either write them down on a little piece of paper or put them in the text chat the way that Robert did, so that we will come back to them during the Q&A. But right now, I'd like to turn it over to Barb Glass to talk about why math matters in post-secondary education. So take it away, Barb.
Thank you very much, Tamara, and thanks to Doug and Jane for their presentations as well. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here talking with you today. And although I won't tell you exactly how old I am, I do have about 30 years in the business of teaching math. And so you can probably guess from that, with a little numeracy skills there, how old approximately that I am. And I just say that by way of saying that I've seen a lot in the classroom in math education over the years. I started in teaching grade 6, 7, 8, and 9 back in the late 80s, and then went to the college system in 91, and have taught in adult upgrading math programs, which eventually morphed into LBS for many years. So it's very interesting to have heard what Jane and Doug have had to say, and I probably reference a couple of their points along the way. I find it's a little difficult to speak specifically about math in post-secondary without drawing in some comments about math in life in general or math in the workforce. What I can do today is to give you a little bit of information about some of the requirements for some post-secondary programs in terms of how learners need to prepare for them, whether they're coming from LBS or from high school or wherever else. One of the key themes that's demonstrated on this slide is that math is about a lot more than numbers. And you know, when adult learners come to us and they say, why do I have to take math? And you know, I want to go into the early childhood education program, or I want to work in retail. Like, why do I really need math? And sometimes that's a hard question to answer. I always find it's easier to answer with adults than when a 14-year-old asks that question. But in any case, thinking mathematically involves so many transferable skills, and it's a hard buy-in to get from students, whether they're adults or whether they're younger. But all of the things highlighted in this little picture here, showing, explaining, justifying, choosing, organizing, recording, all of those things are math-based skills that transfer into many, many other areas as well. Oops, went too far there. I really like this little quote that I found while I was preparing for our presentation today. Math is like a gym for your brain. You may never need to use the quadratic equation in your adult life. How true is that? Yes. But the process of learning it boosts your brain power. By practicing how to solve mathematical problems, you optimize your ability to make complex decisions down the road. Studying abstract concepts like algebra forces your brain to think in new ways, building the connections it will need to understand whatever problems the future might bring. So that was from an education.com site that had a particular focus on why math matters recently. Here's the real answer of why you need math in post-secondary. So yes, even practically speaking, when our young people are going away to school and they have to budget for themselves for the first time, they can run into problems too. In terms of speaking today, we'll think about post-secondary as colleges, universities, and apprenticeship. But in the few minutes that I have to talk with you, I will focus mainly on college and apprenticeship, because I think those are the most relevant to LBS. You know, we don't have a lot of learners coming into LBS and then proceeding into university. those who are on the post-secondary path are generally aiming for college, and then obviously we have the apprenticeship goal path as well. I'm going to quote a very loose stat in Ontario's public colleges. About half of the college programs that are out there today require applicants to have a grade 11 or 12 college stream math or equivalent, because there are equivalent courses out there, in order to apply for and be admitted to a post-secondary program. I really want to say that that's a very loose number, that 50%, because it also depends on the college itself. If a college is offering more technology programs, obviously they're going to have more programs that require math. If a college has more of a human services focus and perhaps less on technology, then probably fewer programs will have a math requirement. But just in general, for someone not to see math through to the end of high school really does count out their eligibility for a lot of post-secondary college programs. Doesn't mean they can't come back, for example, to academic upgrading in the colleges and get a grade 12 math equivalent, or go to an adult credit program and get it, but that then slows down their path a little bit. I really want to stress the second bullet. There's lots of college post-secondary programs that may not require a grade 12 or 11 math, but they list it as a recommended course. And that really, really means that you still need it. And if you don't have that math that's recommended, you will very likely struggle and do less well overall in the program. So if you have a learner, or if you yourself are looking at college programs and you look at the admission requirements and you see a recommended math as opposed to a required, pay some attention to that, because it is important. In college programs, the programs tend to be clustered into areas or departments, or they're sometimes called schools within the college. And I think it's pretty easy for us to agree on the left-hand column. It's fairly implicit to look at those kinds of program areas like information technology, engineering, trades, health sciences, business accounting, and we would, I think, be in general agreement that math is a requirement for those areas. There's a lot of math-based courses, and there's certainly many required maths in order to apply for those programs. But I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about where math is not so obvious. And this is a lot of the programming where there is not a math requirement. There's not even a recommended math requirement, but there's still math. And I think it's in these kinds of program areas that are listed on the right: human services, liberal arts, rec and tourism, culinary hospitality, and media studies, for example, where people think, oh, I really don't need any math. But again, there's some surprising places where you do need math in some of those programs. So given that we don't have a lot of time, I'm just going to highlight a few program areas and some of the programs within them, and just very briefly the kinds of math that might be associated with them. So there's a big cluster of programs in the college system called human services. Sometimes they're called a slightly different name, but in general those would be the programs like social service worker, developmental service worker, community justice worker, early childhood educator, others that fall under that category. So I went back and I had a look at some of our college websites and looked at some of the courses that were listed under those programs. And just very briefly, in those three bubbles below, those were three areas that were very easy to pull out as areas where math was needed, but not necessarily implicit in somebody's thought about what would be required in that kind of a program or in that kind of a career. So, if look at us, we all have to do expense reports. The second bubble, interpreting and analyzing statistics, is huge in almost any post-secondary program, but particularly in programs like these that have a tie to psychology and sociology. And I go back to Jane's comments right at the beginning that stats are very powerful, and many, many people don't understand them and misinterpret them or spin them in ways that they shouldn't be spun. So part of what post-secondary students do, in courses, in programs that are associated with human services, is that they're looking at stats and they're looking at studies, and they're having to interpret stats and graphs and presentations of data and do some critical thinking around that. So without some reasonably solid math skills coming in, that's not easy to do. Second area, just briefly, culinary hospitality programs. Again, I've just plucked 3 names of programs out of many, many, many across the province. Culinary admin, chef training, hospitality management. There might be a little more of an implicit, that math is required to be successful in some of these programs, but again, not for everybody. Some might not make the association between culinary and measuring, or hospitality management, and things like estimating and portioning, as I've listed there, and of course budgeting, cost control. Again, just samples of topics where if you're trying to explain to somebody why you need math if you want to be, a front office worker in a hotel, well, there are reasons, especially if you want to go into a culinary area. And then the last one I'll highlight, where it's not so obvious, is media studies programs. This is a hugely emerging field in the public college system in terms of program offerings and career direction. Again, just three long-standing. The first 2 are long-standing programs: graphic design and photography. 3D animation, that's an up-and-coming program. Mobile app development, web development, all kinds of things that are involved in media now that never were. And so again, when I looked at some of the course outlines in these programs for some of the courses, there's 3 things below that I just highlighted as applied math areas. I see there's a typo though in the bubble on the bottom left, because it says calculating instead of calculating. So I apologize for that. I didn't catch that. Anyway, if there's any photographers in the group, you'll understand the third bubble over here, using the golden ratio and rule of thirds, which I don't understand because I'm not a photographer, but that was something that I pulled out as math-related skills in media programs. That's good. There must be a couple of photographers because they're laughing. I also came across an interesting quote from a journalism expert, and she wrote this: "Aversion to all things numerical seems universal among journalists, and it causes nothing but trouble in today's newsrooms," observed Deborah Potter, a former CBS and CNN correspondent. Simply put, journalists need math skills to make sense of numbers the way they need language skills to make sense of words. I love that quote, and again, I think it's a great illustration of an area where a lot of people wouldn't think math was important, but it is. So we'll speak just for a few minutes about apprenticeship. An apprenticeship, as I'm sure all of you know, is a very broad area. It's also a very misunderstood area in terms of what's required for it and how one goes about attaining an apprenticeship. Apprenticeship training in Ontario is divided into 4 sectors: construction, industrial, motive power, and service. So all of the different apprenticeships that are available fit into one of those 4 categories. Virtually every single apprenticeship program within construction, industrial, and motive power has a significant math component in it. Whether a student pursues an apprenticeship or whether they go to a college post-secondary program and do a trades program, there's a huge amount of math involved in skilled trades. The service sector is a less well-known one. So in apprenticeship service sector, that's where you would find, for example, chef training, hairstyling, early childhood educator. So some of those are newer apprenticeships, not so much the culinary ones, but those ones that we don't think of traditionally as the trades often fit into the service sector. If you want to be a hairstylist, you often need chemistry background. If you need chemistry background, then you really need math background. So there's, again, lots of embedded math that we wouldn't necessarily see or think of when we think of some apprenticeships. So very briefly, if you want to be an apprentice, and many of you know this, you have to have an employer or sponsor first. Most apprenticeships require a high school diploma or equivalent. But the third bullet is less well known. The employer can require anything that he or she or they want to hire an apprentice in addition to the minimum academic requirement. They might require specific courses within the high school diploma. They might require college level training before they sign on an apprentice, or some other kind of trade school training. So it is super, super, super important if you're working with an apprenticeship learner that he or she really researches the requirements and some of the employers that might be, that he or she might be looking at trying to get signed on with. Some of the trade unions, for example, the IBEW, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, for many years they required apprentices signing on to have a grade 12 tech math from high school. Doesn't matter what else they have in their diploma, but they would require a grade 12 tech math. So that's just an example of a particular employer, in this case a trade union, that has a specific math requirement for a specific set of trades. But the great thing about apprenticeship math, as I've noted on the bottom line, is that the math that is used and taught in apprenticeship programming is highly applied and extremely relevant to the trade. But having said that, a lot of apprentices who come in don't have math background that sets them up well for that kind of in-school training and the math that's required for it. So bottom line, as I said before, if you yourself, obviously, or you're working with a learner and they want to pursue any kind of post-secondary, they really need to research the requirements, and in terms of college programs, research what's recommended for math, and maybe go online, maybe do a little bit of surfing to say, okay, I want to go into graphic design. What kind of math is needed in graphic design? So when it's those less obvious ones, that's where we need to maybe help our learners a little bit more to focus on why they need math and what kind of math they need. Just before I finish off and pass back to Tamara, I wanted to also speak a little bit about some of the trends that Jane was referring to with the EQAO students and what we might see coming in. And I would agree that given the EQAO results, we might see more younger folks with weaker math skills. But anecdotally, in the many years that I've taught in the LBS type programs, the older students typically have assessed better in math than the younger students. And probably that's a trend that will continue. The other thing that I'd like to just finish off with, to bring it back to our LBS world, is that as a math teacher of adults, I have heard countless times that, oh, this is much easier than when I tried to learn it, in grade 8 or grade 10 or grade 12 or grade 6 or whatever it was the last time they remember trying to learn math. And I think that goes back to the first, one of my very first slides, where we were talking about the many transferable skills that math has. By the time somebody gets to be an adult, they have better, usually, probably slightly better problem-solving skills, slightly better organizational and logic skills, just because they've learned them in other areas. Maybe that's part of the reason why sometimes adults, when they come back, actually have a little bit of an easier time with math. Not all of them, but a number. I think another reason is because we have some awesome math teachers in LBS in our programming who really do take the time individually to work with our learners and help them get over some of the anxiety that we know they have. And then the third reason I think they can often accomplish a little more in math as adults is because they obviously have a reason for doing it, and they see the need for it. Even if it's one of those people who says, oh, I want to go into early childhood education, why do I need math? When I give them the answer that you're developing all these related skills like problem solving and logic and organization and critical thinking and reasoning and analytical skills, they buy into that a little bit more as adults, because I think they come in seeing that there is a need for that in other parts of their life. So I think I'll end there. I'll pass things back to Tamara, and thank you for joining the webinar today. Oh yes, why does math matter? That's the other real reason.
I had to show this, Barb, and thank you very much for reinforcing the even more ways that math matters in post-secondary than I was even aware of. But I couldn't let you go without actually sharing this slide. I imagine there were a bunch of people right now who are picking themselves up off the floor after reading that. So
yeah, I actually forgot I had that one in there, so I'm glad you clicked on it.
A bit of a humor break. Okay, so now I want to invite Deborah Mountenay to talk to us on why math matters in the workplace. So over to you, Deb.
Thank you, Tamara, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to be wrapping up the formal presentation sections that we've been doing and really touching on a number of the different themes that we've already heard this afternoon. I'm talking to you today about why math matters in the workplace. Everywhere you look, you'll see math used in the workplace, whether it's basic adding and subtracting to make change, or calculating angles to make the right cut on a construction job, or working with ratios to change a recipe to feed a bigger lunch crowd. Math is used at work. We just don't always make the connection between what we learn in school and what we do at work, particularly when it comes to math. No one would suspect that Pythagoras would show up on the construction site, but he does. And for those of us that haven't done Pythagorean theorem for a while, so the square of the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the squares on the other two sides. On a construction site, this is referred to as the 6-8-10 rule. And if someone doesn't have a square with them, they actually can measure 6 inches on one board, 8 inches on the board that it's connected to, so 6 inches on A, 8 inches down on B. You mark that off, and then you mark a board that would be 10 inches in length, and when you put that board to connect with A and B, when those lines cross, you've actually created a right angle. It's a practical use of math that people use all the time on the work site, but they don't tend to think of it as math, and they certainly don't stop and think, I'm using the Pythagorean theorem here. Connecting math in the classroom to the world of work can really help people understand how what they learn in the classroom can be applied on the job. This will lessen the fear that they can't do math, because it is a recurring thing that we hear from people. They do talk about the fact that they can't do math, thinking back to when they were in the classroom and sitting down and writing tests. In fact, it may be that they don't like tests as opposed to they can't do math. But when they're on the job, they can actually apply the math that they've learned. When you think of how math is used in the workplace, some careers or sectors come to mind immediately, primarily those where we picture people sitting around and looking at numbers. Our accountants, bookkeepers, math teachers, investment advisors, bank tellers, and loans officers. But in reality, it's harder to find a job that doesn't require math skills than to find one that does. Is there anyone who would want to go to a hairstylist who can't figure out what proportions to put into the hair coloring that they're putting on your head? Or place investments with a broker who prefers to guess at what options might work for you and doesn't calculate return on investment? And how many of us have seen cashiers who can't make change without the register telling them the amount? As we increase the use of technology in careers, we will see the ongoing use of math skills in our jobs. Math will become more of a requirement, not less. The use of data in jobs continues to increase. Businesses want to know who their customers are, how much they're buying, what are they buying, and when. Gathering and using this information is a task that's being added to many jobs, and this will continue to increase. Large companies will have dedicated staff doing business analysis, but in smaller companies, everyone will be involved. All of this relies on the use of math skills and a comfort with math in doing that business analysis, the forecasting of sales, determining productivity, managing expenses. It becomes a job that everyone within the business is going to be actively involved in. Fundamental math skills are used everywhere. According to the local respondents of the Employer One survey that we conducted in our area in January 2018, these were the sectors of the economy in which hiring took place in the previous year, in 2017. When you look at them, there are occupations where math is used that come to mind in each one of them. Using fundamental math skills where they're adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing, using ratios, percentages, and angles. The things that were learned in school or in adult education classes come to life with real-world application on the job. And the more people advance in their career, the more they will use the math skills that they've developed. In order to be promoted, people are going to need to be continuously using their math skills, using it for more analysis and deeper analysis. And so that fundamental skill set that they acquire when they're in the education system or in adult education, that's really what's going to help determine what their career path is going to look like down the road and what their opportunities are going to be. And I think that circles back really to where we started at the beginning of this presentation when Jane talked about the importance of the EQAO tests and the connection to poverty. In order for people to be able to support their families and to teach their children the value of math skills, they need to be successful as well. We use it for getting hired, for staying employed. We use math for getting promoted, and it becomes a staple of our lifelong learning. Tamara?
Thank you very much, Deb. So I think we've fairly clearly demonstrated how math matters throughout our lives, from our initial school years all the way through to our time in the workplace. So we're going to move now into the panel part of our program. So we have a few questions, and what I'm going to do is invite our speakers to address these questions. Maybe just 1 or 2 quick points per question would be great. And we have not forgotten about questions that you may have or that you have already asked. So the Q&A portion will follow. Our first question is, has math actually changed that much over the past 20 years? If so, how? If not, then why are we seeing increased challenges with learning and applying math? I'm going to start with Jane here. So go ahead, Jane.
Well, I have a theory on all of this. It may not be everybody else's theory, but I've always gone with, yeah, there's some processes that have changed. You know, that all of a sudden you'll have a kid come home and go, well, you know, that's not the way the teacher showed me. But here the thing is, let's go with it. Math is still math. 2 + 2 still equals 4. And the method you get there doesn't really matter to me as much as the answer, even though somehow that's the only way I passed grade 13 functions, is because I never got the right answer, but the way I got there was apparently semi-correct. So I never really understood that part of math. But I have to say, if we're looking at back in the 60s and 70s, teachers didn't need bachelors to teach. They needed teachers' college. But some of the best teachers we ever had were people that struggled themselves. They understood how to do this. And I think that this is, if you've struggled with something yourself, you've had to find other ways. So you found another way to do it. So you understand when somebody's going, I don't get that. When I've had all of my learners over the years, and I'm going to go, Barb, you're 2 years more than me. I always said there was going to be one of us that was going to have more. But it was the idea that many of them kept saying, I didn't get it that way. I don't even want to look at it that way. So I had to come up with new ways. And it was okay because that was enjoyable for me. I liked math because by dumb luck I had a mother who believed that women could do math and thought everybody should be able to. And so I came at it in a positive manner. And I do like that I struggled compared to the rest of my family. I never got geometry. You know, I looked at that thing as Deb was going through it, and I was going, oh, yes, I remembered that one, and it always scared me. As soon as somebody gave me a triangle, I just asked for a protractor. Don't make me figure it out. I just think that right now it's the applied math that are our problem. We know how to teach academic math. Our teachers out there are excellent at teaching academic math. Somebody needs to come up with a better applied math programming within our elementary and our high schools, and that's my belief.
Thanks, Jane. How about you, Doug? Anything you want to add here?
Well, Jane, I think you pretty well covered it all, but one of the things that I think has happened over the past 20 years, I don't think math isn't changing. It's right or it's wrong. But I think what we've seen is the school system has changed, and a lot of opportunities for people who struggled with math in the classroom did better with math if they could do it in the shop. Or in the hair salon, and all of those, or even in the music class for that matter. And those things have gone away over time, and it's becoming more focused on academic and less on applied.
Thanks, Doug. Barb, is there anything you'd like to share?
Well, I would, my gut answer to the question, has math actually changed that much, is no. It actually hasn't. And I concur with some of what Doug and Jane said in that it's the way that K-12 students are being taught math has changed, and the degree to which it's applied in the workforce has changed, as Deb has outlined. And what I don't think has kept up with the change is our society's value of math and sort of discipline that's needed to learn math, just as it is to learn reading and writing. It's no different. It's just another discipline. It uses many of the same, fundamental skills. I think, and some people will not agree with me, but I think it's also societal in that, we have many more single-parent families. We have many more families with both parents working. I think as parents, we have less time, honestly, to not so much help our students do numbers 1 to 10 in their math homework, but just to oversee the amount of time and energy they apply to math. Doesn't matter whether it's applied or academic math. Doesn't matter if it's grade 6 or grade 12. I think that's a trend that is implicit in why students in general are perhaps not doing as well in math in Ontario and in Canada as they used to.
Thanks, Barb. And Deb, is there anything that you would like to add to this discussion question?
Yes, actually, I agree with everyone. Math has not changed. Math is math, and the numbers all add up, and there is no alternative facts on numbers. But I think one of the things that we've also seen as a big change is in our society now, we would rather click than think. And I think part of the issue is we have so many other ways to be able to get information. So, it applies to how we do math, but also everything else. The tendency now is not to actually stop and think about something, but you go to find what did someone else say about that. And, it gets to the whole issue that we see in other areas as well, where people aren't actually looking at things that they come across on the internet and on various other places, where they're not actually looking at it from a critical standpoint and saying, who wrote this? Is there a slant to it? Is this why they're saying this? If it appears in front of you when you click on something, then it's taken as gospel, as opposed to people stopping to think about, why is it that way? And I think that occurs with math as well. And I know years ago we heard, the initial discussion of math scores dropping a bit because people had calculators in the classroom. I think we've just escalated the ability to not actually think something through on your own, and so therefore you don't need to learn how various pieces would be put together or how to do the math if you can actually just find something else as a tool to click for you. And unfortunately, at some point in your life, that's going to catch up with you.
Great observation. I feel like we could probably do an entire webinar on just that one topic. I know you all touched on math trends when you were doing your individual presentations, but I want to know if there are any other math trends that you're seeing in your work. And again, in the interest of time, I'm going to ask you to keep it to 1 or 2. And this time I'm going to start with you, Barb.
Well, a trend that I see all the time amongst adults coming into our programs is a real lack of basic math skills. And it's more prevalent in, I'd say, the 20 to 30 group than it is the 30, 40, 50-year-olds. But like it or not, some of the rote math that we used to learn has been lost, and that's a fundamental basis of, all of the higher level math that we do. So that's a trend that I've seen over probably 30 years.
going to move to Jane.
I'm going to concur with Barb on that, is that I've heard the same thing, is that I keep hearing about financial literacy programs. Like I even heard just Manulife was going to start putting a whole bunch of money into that. And I was going, that's lovely, but can we start doing the math behind the budgets? That's what's missing.
Okay, thank you. And Deb, do you want to weigh in on this one?
I better turn my microphone on to do that. So I think when we're working with data and looking at what the issues are out there, we're seeing math being used much more in every aspect of business because there's so much analysis of every aspect of a business now that there isn't really any type of work that people are doing where someone somewhere doesn't end up sitting down and pulling numbers together and looking at exactly how is that business doing and making decisions on people's futures based on that.
Thanks, Deb. And Doug, do you want to have a final word on this question?
Thank you. Again, make math real. Let's take a look at using documents that people are already familiar with. And I think the other thing is that we need to be thinking about teaching sciences, technology, engineering, introducing kids in the kindergarten to grade 6 area so that math starts to make sense for them at that age.
Thank you. We have a couple more questions, and from the look of the text chat, some of the questions and answers that are currently being asked are spurring on some additional conversation. We're going to draw it back in a little bit tighter to our work in adult literacy and numeracy. So the question I have is adult math or numeracy safe from these trends? Is it outside of these trends, or what are the impacts of these trends? So I'm going to ask you, Barb, if you want to start with this one.
I think the more time goes on, the more adult learners and our math teaching of them is more susceptible to the trends because they're a product of the things that we're seeing now in our younger people, which goes back to some of Jane's comments. You know, our kids are stressed, as someone made a point on the text chat, and I think we're all more stressed, and learning becomes harder the more stressors go on in the rest of our lives. So I think that the answer to that is a little broader than just math and numeracy. In general, though, I think we're always and still struggling with the math phobia and the I don't like math, and so many people, you know, it's completely acceptable to say, oh yeah, I was never good at math. It's not completely acceptable to say, oh, I was never good at reading. So there's still that trend that I think we're going to see for a long time, that math is somehow different and it's okay to not like it and not be good at it because you don't really need it. So I think we have to work hard to continue to debunk that myth.
Absolutely. Deb?
Yes. I think, yeah, for the adult literacy providers, you know, you're going to be seeing these same issues continuing for a while anyway. But it is easier when you're talking with the adults because they're also living out in the real world, and they've got the daily use of math that they're doing, whether it's at the grocery store or in their budgeting, and so they have an opportunity to actually draw on those real world examples, and that then makes the math easier for people to understand. And I think it really contributes to why you hear people say, I didn't understand this in high school, but now it makes sense. And it's because they're actually using these different things in their daily lives.
I was waiting for you to clap there, Doug, because it really, what Deb just said, reinforces what you were saying about real life application. Is there anything that you'd like to add to this question?
Yeah, I think, again, we sort of go back to the basics, as I mentioned earlier. Let's make math real, as opposed to maybe how it's described in the K-12 system.
Thank you. And Jane, is there anything that you'd like to share about whether adult math or numeracy is safe from some of these trends?
I don't know if anything is safe, if the adults are really safe, because once again, I keep going, there are solutions to stopping the cycle of the problem. Because once again, I read something about the stress here and heard the stress, and I think it's interesting because I don't think we actually measured stress when I was a kid. Nobody really cared if we were stressed because they just went, nobody knew what to do about it. I think it's interesting because now we assume that we never had it back then, and I'm going to go, you know what? I was probably a lot more stressed as a child than I am now, because now I just take, the nice, legal drugs to take that edge off. But as a kid, it's like it was, I had a lot more stressors because people had expectations of me to get things done. So I would have to say I've watched kids now seem a little less stressed about those things. They're more stressed about maybe society, but not about the scores at school seem to be a little bit less on them. So I'm not so sure that's going to have a different effect. These still, to me, it's about if your adults aren't math literate, the children will not be, and will continue the cycle just like we do for reading and writing.
Wow, I never would have thought that a conversation about math would have touched on so many other diverse topics. So this has been great for me. We have one final question, and I hope people won't leave because we're not quite done after this last question. Very close, but not quite there. I'm interested in hearing what suggestions our panelists have for adult literacy educators and planners when it comes to math. So I'm going to start with you, Deb.
Okay. I think the adult literacy educators have a lot of good reference materials available through the system to be able to bring some of the real life examples into the classroom or the one-on-one training that they're doing with the adult learners. But I think one of the things that they may want to do is also to take a look and see what they don't have. So are there some sectors or some occupations where you don't have information that you'd like to be able to get from the other people in the community? And I think if they approach their literacy network to let them know what types of materials they might like to have or what sectors, and even ask, if something's available, then those literacy networks all have connections with their workforce boards and with other groups in the community, and I'm sure between the two of us we'd be able to find some other additional resources for people, because that's always a challenge, right, is finding something new and fresh to be able to bring into your classroom and in working with the adult students.
Thanks, Deb. I like the tie-in with working with the workforce planning boards, although I think you may have just created a little bit more work for me or put it out there. Jane, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Of course. It's my whole thing, the answer to this was immediately get comfortable with it. I hear from my instructors a lot out there that they're going, I hate math. And I'm going, well, don't let anybody know that. Just get over it. It's got to be, you've got to work on those applied math skills. That's the necessity. People will see how that relates. And if you do struggle with it, go on the Quill portal that Deb put up there there's lots of task-based activities for math that you can use, and it'll make it much easier. I think that if we focus in on the things that are important to everyday life, people will become much more comfortable with them. And I am always going to be, I just saw Deb had written something about the apprenticeships, not letting you use calculators for the tests, and I'm just the biggest proponent of going, calculators are used in real life. Why are we not allowing people to use calculators? Let's teach people good estimation skills and let them use calculators.
Okay, thank you for that. And I'm going to ask you, Doug.
Okay, well, I think, again, if we keep going back, I sound like a broken record. I think we need to make sure that math is real, but I also think that it's important that we don't just provide some instruction and then some questions and have a test. I think what we need to do is not just teach the math, but teach the steps of getting the answer, and provide a variety of steps of getting that answer, because that way we are being very client-centered, and we're allowing the learner to select the method that works best for him or her.
Thanks, Doug. Process is such an important part of everyday life, as well as getting the final answer. Barb.
I would echo some of the things that others have said. I think that the point that Jane made earlier about a lot of teachers that are teaching in, say, the K-8 system may not be math specialists, and therefore, they may never have liked math, but they're kind of stuck teaching it. We're not exempt from that in our world either. So if as a literacy, numeracy practitioner, math isn't your favorite thing, try to find a mentor, try to find someone that you can connect with, whether it's within your own agency or through your support organization or through your regional network, that can, maybe give you a few tips and tricks and make you a little bit more comfortable with it. Or take a quick basic math course yourself. There's lots of free stuff available online. Try to do something to make yourself more comfortable with it, and I think Doug was alluding to that as well. In terms of long-term planning, the need for math skills in the job market and in post-secondary studies, whether it's apprenticeship or college or university, it's never going to go away. It's only going to increase. So we also have to grapple with the point that academic math, and I don't mean academic in terms of the streams in high school, academic and applied. I mean math that is used in a college or university or apprenticeship setting it's always going to be there. And so if that's a career path that someone wants to take, we need to help them to acknowledge that and to find the resources to get them from the level they're at now to the level they need to be at to pursue that kind of programming, because it's not going to go away. The need for math is not going to go away.
Thank you, Barb. And I'd like to thank all of our panelists today for sharing their thoughts and experiences. They're not quite finished their job today, because we're going to move into the Q&A segment, but in the interest of those who may need to sign off before the Q&A session has ended, I just wanted to bring a few things to your attention. So it's the final slide here of today's presentation, but a quick reminder that you may wish to browse other online community of practice topics that have been addressed in the past, and the web link is there on your screen. And we'd really appreciate it if you would take 3 to 5 minutes of your time to complete a quick evaluation. Sarah is going to put that up in just a moment. Your feedback is really important to us. It's so important, in fact, that we're having a draw. If you complete the evaluation and provide your name and an email address, you will be entered into a draw for a $25 gift card. And if you're interested in this topic of math and numeracy, please consider registering for the next webinar in this series, which is on a topic that many of us may be familiar with, math anxiety. This webinar is on October 25th from 2 until 3:30 p.m. and I believe we've already had quite a few registrants, so don't delay if you're thinking of attending. And a reminder that new this year for the online community of practice, if you take all 5 webinars, you can request a certificate of recognition, which is good for anybody's professional development portfolio. So now we are going to move into the Q&A session. Please feel free to complete the evaluation. I have seen a few questions come in over the text chat, and I'm going to go through them. I know, Robert, you had a question early on, and I believe it would be for Doug, where, Doug, I think you referred to math as the weakest competency, and Robert was wondering if you could define that a little bit more. Can you define math as the weakest competency?
Great question, Robert. And I think I probably should not have said it was the weakest competency. I think that what we are seeing through assessments, etc., is that tends to be the competency where the most number of our learners need the most work. I think that the reading, the writing, certainly we have to work on that as well, but from what I'm seeing and hearing, numeracy or math tends to be the one that they come in where they need the most amount of work and probably are the most resistant to. Does that help?
Okay. Barb just put up her hand, and that's a great reminder. I'm going through the questions that were indicated in the text chat, but if you're online and you'd like to ask a question verbally, then of course that is an option. You just have to press the raised hand icon like Barb did. So I'm thinking, Barb, we should pass it over to you. Maybe you want to add to what has been discussed?
Thanks, Mary. I just wanted to make a quick follow-up comment to Doug's. And in terms of, yes, many of our learners need to go a long way in developing their numeracy skills, but what research has also shown is that the numeracy skills can be improved with a lesser intervention than other skills. So 4 weeks of working on numeracy will correlate to significant skill gains, like more than you might think. And I think that is partly because math is one of those things, as we know, if we don't use it, we lose it. But if we have learned it in the past and we're brushing up, then it comes back to us a little more quickly. So that's just a bit of an aside.
Okay, thank you. We did have a question from Helen. Are fractions essential in higher level math? There continues to be some debate about this. Do any of our presenters want to address that question?
Yes, this is Deb. I think we're seeing a lot of the use of fractions in employment and in a lot of different job settings. So the use of fractions is really considered, part of basic math as well for people that are going to be out in the workplace. So I would encourage all the literacy programs to be including fractions when they're working with their learners. I know there's been some conversation about potentially less, importance, but in fact, there's still lots of areas where people really need to have a good understanding of fractions and how to do calculations, and they're used in a number of different industries. So I would say it's still a very strong skill that people.
Thanks very much, Deb. I'd like to say that I know we've gone our hour and a half, but I have a feeling that our presenters are willing to stay on for longer, given that the conversation is so good. So please stay with us as long as you're interested in this topic. And before you go, we'd love it if you would complete the evaluation. So I see Barb and Doug would like to respond to the question. So go ahead, Barb.
We had a little bit of a chat about this in the chat box. So absolutely, fractions are fundamental to so much, not only higher level math, but even just day-to-day math. Conceptually, it's sometimes a hard thing for people to get their heads around, and so sometimes there's some pretty good hands-on math type strategies we can use to help people with fraction basics, and then that often paves the way for their understanding of how fractions apply later. But absolutely, fractions are fundamental to all kinds of other areas of math.
Thanks, Barb. And Doug.
I agree with what has been said already about fractions, and it's especially relevant to the trades. Carpentry continues to use fractions, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not just every day or in the kitchen, that sort of stuff. It's very much so in the apprenticeship pieces.
Well, thanks for reinforcing that, Doug, how important math is to the trades. I see that Robert had a question. Why do you, the panel, feel that there is a fear of using critical, and my screen is shut off or shut down a little bit here, but I want to say critical thinking. Hang on. Sorry, I just lost it there. I think it's why is there a fear of using critical thinking skills? Robert, did I get that right? Because my text chat is cut off. Robert may not be on any. Oh, sorry, Robert says I think so. So do any of our panelists have any question or any responses for Robert? Why do you think there's a reluctance to rely on critical thinking?
I don't know that it's as much a reluctance as critical thinking tends to end up being the second choice. The first choice tends to be people going, and using their device if they've got a phone with them. Everything is checked on the phone first, and then you stop to think about the answer as a secondary backup. And I think we just need to shift that so that people are doing the critical thinking first and thinking for themselves, and then if they want to second guess themselves and check what did other people have to say, do it that way. But right now the tendency with everything is what's my quickest answer, and the human brain is still not as fast as the computer for some of these answers. So that's the direction that people.
Thanks, Deb. And Jane?
I agree with Deb. I also think that there's that whole point when critical thinking was started with the essential skills. People struggled with it because it became was it more about problem solving? When did it happen? So I think it's more that people aren't really familiar enough with what the critical thinking piece is as compared to some of the other thinking skills.
Okay, great. I see, I'm just trying to go through the text chat here. There was a question about where to find the EQAO tests online. So Jane, did you address that one in text chat?
I did. It's literally, you can find sample tests. If you go to the EQAO website, you can find sample tests for all of them. So it's worth a look if you're wondering what's being included in those. But treat them like you actually have to read the questions. If you just do the quick read, you will fail.
Barb, is there something you'd like to share?
Tamara, I was just going to follow up on the last comments about critical thinking. I think it's a branding issue partly. Critical thinking sounds as a term like a bit scary, and so I think sometimes that people don't understand what it is, which Jane kind of alluded to, and that there's better ways that we can describe it to people. Good decision making, weighing the pros and cons of a situation, evaluating two choices from a shopping flyer. Like, there's critical thinking all over the place. So I don't honestly think it's that people are necessarily afraid to use it. Sometimes I think they don't even know that they're using it. So anyway, that's just a thought. Just how we brand it is important.
Branding seems to affect so much of what we do in literacy and basic skills. Just a couple other questions that popped up. I see you have your hand in the air, Doug, and I'm going to come back to you. People are asking if this is going to be recorded. It is being recorded, and it will be on the Contact North list of the online community of practice webinars. Other folks are asking for the link to further webinars. Sarah, could I ask you to put that in the text chat, the link to the further I guess there's further webinars, but then there's also the webinars that have been done in the past.
I'm just wondering if folks could just wait. We are going to send out a package to you following this webinar. It will include the link to today's webinar, the registration link for our next webinar, and a lot of other points. So if you can just be a little patient, it'll all be in a message coming right to your inbox.
Thanks, Sarah. That's great. And Doug, you were going to comment on, I think, the critical thinking question.
Firstly, I agree with all the critical thinking comments that have been made so far. I think that if we could just redefine it, I think that would make a huge difference. I also think that part of critical thinking is estimation, and I mentioned that earlier. I think that we can use some tools and strategies to assist our learners to better estimate if their answers are correct or not.
Great, thanks very much, Doug. Now, there was another question from Mohammed. Mohammed said, math is the same in any culture, language, or society. Why do kids in poor families in Canada have more challenges? This sounds like a question that you may want to weigh in, Jane, although you may not be the only one. So I'm going to pass it over to you.
Okay, yeah, math is a universal language. I've got to say, I've actually used some testing, including the camera test with people that didn't speak a word of English, and they could certainly pass the math section, no problem. So that, you're absolutely right. The reasoning is, in many cases, people are in poverty because of usually it's a long-term family, like we're not talking about situational poverty, we're talking about generational poverty, where the family has been within 2 or more generations. And what has happened is, living in poverty, you feel like you have to stay there. You don't see a way out. You think that this is your way of life, and most of them do not have a number of high skills themselves. School was seen as a revered thing, but not something that they were going to be successful at. And the school environment is completely done as a middle class environment, as is the workplace. So if you live in poverty, you have a way of living your life in poverty, and it doesn't fit into the middle class system. So they don't do well at school. They have parents that can't support them at school because they don't have the skills. And so they're not understanding what they can do to help their children. It's not that they don't love their children, help their children. We run a Get Set Learn program, which is our family literacy program for people that are on Ontario Works or ODSP. And these parents are coming in going, what do you mean? I can teach my child this? Oh, I can do this without even being, a reader myself. I can do all of these things with my children that will develop these skills. But without that kind of programming, you don't have the parents giving that backup of just even the support of you can do this. It's that positive reinforcement. Studies have been done to show that children that are raised in impoverished homes receive 6 negative comments to every 1 positive, while kids that are raised in home by parents that have high education, they usually receive the exact opposite. So it's that negative reinforcement. It beats people down, and they just don't have the skills or knowledge of what.
Thanks, Jane. I know you do a good job of answering that. And Mohammed, I hope that has answered your question or given you some food for thought. Do any of our other presenters want to weigh in on that? You can put up a check mark or an X for me. That would be great. Or something. Okay, so Barb's good. Deb's good. Doug, anything you want to add? Well, I'll assume that if Doug wants to.
I think Jane covered it. No, I think Jane covered it. I think that poverty has a huge influence on all of education, not just math.
Absolutely. I see a question from Liz. Is there any way we can provide training for our instructors and/or volunteers to help them improve their math skills and their confidence to teach math? So I think I heard you say, Barb, that you would kind of encourage people to improve their own math skills. But do any of you know of any resources that would lend themselves to the question that Liz has asked, besides going out and seeking your own sort of program? I see Barb and Deb. So Barb, why don't you start?
Well, interestingly, one things that we use with our learners is the Khan Academy resource, which is a free online math resource, and you can basically build a custom course for yourself. It's free. You create an account just like you would on any other kind of a website, and it's ranges from very basic math topics right up to much more complex ones. So sometimes we refer learners there when we're looking for something to supplement them. But I've had even my own kids have gone on there as adults to brush up on some math skills. So it's KHAN, Khan Academy, and you can easily Google it. So that would be one suggestion where you could just do it on your own time at no cost and sort of create a custom set of modules that you wanted to go through.
That's great. I think, Liz, you've asked a great question here, because a lot of people would like to respond to it, and I'm going to go in order and say, Deb.
I think that I've seen some good suggestions coming through the chat section, and I'm just going to suggest that we capture the the different resources, and perhaps they can then be sent out as a supplement so that it makes it easier for people to see some of these different resources and be able to take a look and see what works for them. And also, I would again highly recommend people contact your literacy network, because if a source or a resource isn't currently available for you, I'm sure that they've got some good connections to be able to track down some opportunities for them. And I'm going to include the workforce planning boards, make a commitment that they would assist the literacy networks in finding some of those resources for you. The school boards may have some things as well, and we'll just see what we can find so that it's you get to go through and take a look at what's going to be most beneficial for your learners.
Thanks, Deb. And further to capturing the great information that's being exchanged in text chat, Sarah's going to help me do that so we don't lose any of this good stuff. So thank you for that. And Doug.
I'd suggest perhaps the tutors may want to check in with the online e-channels, because then they could do some numeracy upgrading or mathematics upgrading at their own time. I figured you'd like that, Sarah.
That's a really, really good suggestion, Doug. Yeah, I've been hearing really good stuff about the e-channel providers and their courses, so thank you for raising that. And Jane?
I'm just going to do the shameless plug for the Learning Networks of Ontario website, where you can go in and find there's lots of resources for teachers there on teaching math. We did one called Adding to My Skills that you also can go into, having the person also go on the Learning Hub to get supplemental materials there that will help teach. So don't forget that you've got those, you know, the e-channels to be used as well, but they hook into a lot of the documents that are already there. But yeah, you don't have to recreate the wheel. It's been created a few times.
Well, and this is why this is a community of practice. So I love that we're talking about both utilizing resources that have already been developed, but also using existing networks and leveraging those networks to try to assist our practitioners in doing what they do on the front lines, which is really, really good work. So I don't think I've forgotten any questions that were posed in text chat. I'm just going to do a quick look to see if anybody who's still on has raised their hand. Sylvage, I see there's a check mark next to your name, but that could have been you agreeing with something. So I'm going to clear them. And if you're still on and if you still would like to ask a question, then please feel free to either, put up your hand or go with the green check mark again. Just gonna wait a few seconds. Of course, if you've been hanging on every word and you haven't filled out the evaluation yet, you still have time. And Sarah's been keeping me updated on the number of people who are completing, which has been a great number, and we really, really appreciate that. Oh, Sylvage, you say you're happy? Even better. Okay, that's good. Okay, well, I'm not seeing any other questions, so I really, really want to thank everybody who has participated today. Thank you, Sarah from Contact North. I don't know how we get these webinars done without your assistance and that of your colleagues. Thanks so much to our presenters for giving of their time and their expertise. Really, really appreciate that. And to those who are still online, I hope you'll be joining us throughout the entire series so that we can drill a little deeper into this topic, math, as we did last year with blended learning. So thanks so much, everybody, for dealing with whatever tech issues you may have had, and for your great questions and for supporting each other.
And thanks to you, Tamara. You did